Thank you very much. Absolutely a pleasure to be here with you this morning. Thank you very much for inviting me, Amazon. This is the one-slide summary of my entire professional career. It's the transition from analog to digital. As many of you in this room will probably have had a very similar journey, but the number of people in the room who have learned to type on an old mechanical keyboard is getting smaller by the day. Just show of hands, who's learned to type on an old mechanical, wow, quite the geriatric meeting here this morning, huh? So, a fascinating journey, a world that seems to be escalating, just going faster and faster. And I just finished writing a book called The Uncertainty Principle, how to basically weaponize uncertainty. And I'm beginning to think that this is quite an interesting year to launch a book with that title. This is a wonderful quote by Voltaire: "Uncertainty is an uncomfortable position, but certainty is an absurd one." The waves just seem to be getting bigger and bigger. And I don't quote many communists, but this is one of my favorite ones. There are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. And I really feel that we're living through, these times today, and certainly in the world of AI. I mean, this is just absolutely nuts. I don't know about you, but I wake up every morning and turn on my phone and think, oh, really, And things happen so quickly and the pace is just relentless. So let me quote one of the greatest artists of our times. This is Big Z, the artist previously known as Mark Zuckerberg, who in an interview recently said, "In today's game, speed isn't optional, it is the strategy." And I think he's absolutely right from his point of view. But how do you reflect on that as technology leaders? Now, as Miriam said, I talk about the never normal. I wrote this book 15 years ago called The New Normal. I deeply regret that title now. I thought it was sexy 15 years ago. I can't stand it anymore. But I wanted to describe a world where, 15 years ago, I had to explain digital and what would happen if digital became normal. And I was in Italy last summer, where an Italian artist painted the logos of today onto the artifacts of the past, and where you could see how things were disappearing, how the media was transforming, how a community lived differently. And I love this, two old ladies chatting under a Twitter sign. So a big part of your job over the last 15 years was exactly that. I mean, digital was a new thing for most of your businesses, and how do you leverage and weaponize that opportunity? I think we're now getting into what I call the never normal. And this is a world of constant change, of volatility, and the tech companies, of course, are putting oil onto the fire. I actually believe that it's crescendo. I think digital and then mobile and cloud and AI, it just gets more and more intense. And I hate some of the negative stories about that. I hate this cover. I mean, this is fear-mongering. But I do have to agree that the waves just get higher and higher. Now, this never normal is not just about technology. It's the world of environmental challenges and ecological challenges. It's the geopolitical situation. It's the financial uncertainty. And I really love this. What doesn't kill you will probably try again. That's the kind of world we've gotten into. And I live in Belgium, but in the UK, I think a year or 2 years ago, this was the word of the year in the UK, polycrisis. One misery after another. And I think that is your British optimism that shines through. But I think we have to acknowledge that this is the reality, and I think it's a classic red pill, blue pill moment. You want to see this, or you can choose to ignore it. But it's really challenging, and I'm a big Wilson fan, and I loved his statement. We still have Paleolithic emotions as human beings. We have medieval institutions, and we're starting to have godlike technology. And the complexity of this never normal is that we have to deal with the unknown unknowns. Now, I was not a Rumsfeld fan, but I love this statement where he said, you have your known knowns, you know what you know. You have your known unknowns, you know what you don't know. But more and more, we're surrounded by unknown unknowns. How do you build strategy in a world of unknown unknowns? And it's driving executives crazy. And I'm European, I do a lot of work in the US, and there's a term in the US that I really like, it's called snafu. And it's something that is, you hear it from time to time in a US conversation, we hit a snafu. And it actually comes from a military slang. And it's an acronym, it stands for Situation Normal, All Fucked Up. And I think that is the best description of the world at large that I now have. And when you look at that, there are two fundamental ways to deal with that. You can either say, oh, we have to protect ourselves, we have to hedge, we have to mitigate our risks, we have to find ways to deal with that uncertainty, complexity, and challenges, or can we leverage it? Can we use it to our advantage? And I really believe that in this world of never normal, that's exactly what we're going to have to do. Now, I'm an electronics engineer by training. And I think many of you will have studied electronics at one point. And there's a wonderful component called the diode, which is basically a one-way street for current. And I started building a model which I think tries to make sense of that continuous change. And the core element is relevance. And in whatever business you're in whatever market you're in, the core question is what you're doing relevant to your customers? I love the story about the BBC. And the BBC was super relevant, and then it had to adjust in a world where there were more opportunities to engage in content. So how can you gain and stay relevant? And the second element is proficiency. Do you have the right skills, capabilities, resources to actually make it happen? Now, if you put that into a classic model, duh, everybody wants to be there. Everybody wants to do things that are relevant for your customers, to make sure you're relevant in your market and that you have the capabilities and skills to actually deliver on that promise. You can say, easy, once you're there, and I assume you're all there, you can just say, stay. But that doesn't work because relevance erodes. There is a certain natural gravity that basically just draws you down. If you're very relevant, whatever happens, over time, your relevance just basically goes down. I can say, okay, if some of you are in that situation, we'll just reverse it. And you can't do that. This is a one-way street. This is a diode effect. And what you actually need to do is you need to figure out, once you're down, you need to figure out how you can start doing the right things again for your market, your customers, but then you often have to then recharge. You have to build in the new capabilities to actually make it happen. And this is a continuous cycle. And this cycle is probably going to happen faster and faster and faster. And the complexity that you have is dealing with that diode dilemma. Now, you're all in a situation where our relevance erodes. And the problem in the never normal is it erodes faster and faster. But that idea of retargeting and then recharging, I think, is a way to reframe the complexity of that never normal. Now, I've gotten quite fond of that never normal. And I'm always curious, in a room like this, how many look at this and say, oh, scary, let's protect, and how many are using that to your advantage? Now, let me zoom in on AI. I think, we've talked about it all morning. We live in a world where data is everything. I mean, I like that term, dataism. Everything that we do is basically powered by data now. And it's pretty scary because that is part of that new normal that we've gotten into. What we read, what we watch, what we eat, who we love, it's all powered by data. This is how couples meet in the US, and that is pretty scary when you think about it. No? And the problem is, as consumers, our expectations are being raised every single day. And I apologize to the BBC, but I take Netflix as an example. I remember when Netflix came out, I had conversations with my friends who said, oh, wow, the algorithm is so great. Now, people are saying, it's terrible. There's nothing interesting that the algorithm provides me. And there's more content than ever before, but our bar is being raised as consumers every single day. Now, I think a really important element to this is technology, but it's not the solution. The problem is that in most cases, it's all about timing. There's a famous theory of optionality. Whatever you do in life, you follow a pattern like this. You start, you grow, you peak, and you decline. You can apply this to a brand, a product, an organization, life itself. If you wait too long to reinvent yourself, it's not going to work. If you're going down, forget it. And in the past, most of you worked in companies where you could wait until you're at your peak and then you would think about what to do next. And that worked in the old normal. It doesn't work in the new never normal. Because now you have to preempt that. You have to basically innovate when you can, not when you need. Because if you wait until you need in the never normal, you're going to be too late. And that sounds really simple, but it's not. Peter Drucker beautifully phrased this a long time ago. The greatest danger in times of turbulence, the never normal, is not the turbulence. It's not the never normal that's going to kill you, but it's to act with yesterday's logic. And I urge you to think in your company, your organization, how many times do you see yesterday's logic being used in a world that is moving faster than ever before? Or yesterday's data or tools. Now, I added these. This is not Peter Drucker, okay? But it really touches on the very core why we're here today. This is everyone's challenge in the room. You have more information, you have less time to turn that into actionable knowledge. And IT is changing. IT used to be all about the T, and now it's all about the I. And now we even, in many cases, take IT for granted. You have no idea how many times I walk into a company when I have to do a presentation to a board or an executive team, and the first question is, how do you feel about IT? And then, what is the reaction? And often I hear people say, oh, no. I mean, then you know they're taking it for granted. But we couldn't run companies without IT. This is one of my favorite images. This is the FBI fingerprint record-keeping department in 1953. No computers. File cabinets storing thousands of American criminals, their fingerprints in how would you organize the file cabinets? How would you label them? Or even worse, when a police comes in and says, hey, I found the fingerprint, can you run a match? How would you do that? We take IT for granted, and we take information for granted. Walter Deming, founder of modern quality management, once famously said, in God we trust, all others must bring data. And he was right. But the problem becomes a quality issue, because in most companies, there is more fiction written in Excel than in Word. And if you look at this challenge, that you all have more information, less time, turn it into actionable knowledge, the recipe is very simple. If you want to connect, you have to collect the dots. But most of you are still collecting. You're not connecting. And this is where AI is starting to have almost magical properties. I really believe digital done. The new era, wow. When I was a kid, I had bets with my friends if computers would ever beat us at chess. And in 1997, a purpose-built computer, Deep Blue, beat Kasparov. And I watched that game on television, blew my mind. And I thought, wow! But the problem is, we understood how to do it. We just didn't have the computational horsepower to make it happen. And now we do. And I think it's going to be wow and scary at the same time. This was the cover of The Economist last year. AI is heaven and hell. I think it's true. It's going to be both. I'll show you both. This is my favorite AI. And, this is StorySign. This is an AI for children born with a hearing disability that have to learn how to read. And the problem is that most children's books have not been translated into sign language. So they have captured some of the best sign language experts in the world, built the algorithm, populated the data, and now the child can take the app, point it at a children's book, and it's translated in real time in sign language for this kid to learn how to read. That is wow. Heartwarmingly wow. But there's plenty of stuff that you think, really? This is Interview Copilot. Came across this recently. This is if you're applying for a job, and most of the first job interviews are done on Zoom or Teams or whatever. And if you have to talk to a recruiter and you're kind of nervous about it, you turn on Interview Copilot, and it listens in on your Zoom call with the recruiter and whispers you the right answers to the difficult question from the recruiter. If you know that the recruiter is also using an AI to generate difficult questions, you think, hey, why are we even doing this, right? But I have never seen technology go mainstream so quickly. Look at Amazon. and how the idea of a conversational interface to find what you want is going to completely redefine e-commerce. Maybe this is my finest example. I love this. This is Brickit. This is a freely downloadable app. If you have kids who love Legos, you might want to try it out. Use case is very simple. You throw all your Legos onto the floor. And then the app makes a catalog of all the Legos that are lying on your floor. And based on what it sees, it will then make suggestions what you can build with the Legos that are lying on your floor. And you can scroll through them and say, hey, that's kind of cute, click, and it will then generate the instructions step by step on how to build what you just selected. That seems like magic, but it's now a freely downloadable app. So I think digital, done. We're entering a new era. We don't even know the behavior patterns. You've all seen this, but I love this. Driverless car gets stopped by the police in San Francisco. Imagine what goes to that policeman's head. There's nobody in the car, right? And then he walks back, and then the car says, I'm getting out of here. I don't trust this at all. It's a fabulous new set of design patterns. And especially when Gen AI hit the scene 2.5 years ago, it is pretty impressive. 2 years, that's it. And I compare it to a flight simulator. So on the left, this is one of the first flight simulators that I ever used, and I loved it. You know? On the right is a current version of a flight simulator. If you put on something like a Vision Pro and you really feel you're in that jet, between left and right is about 25 years. Imagine this technology is getting better every single year. Now, the problem is the S-curve is how technology develops. We all know this. As technologists, I mean, slow growth, fast growth, normalcy. But then there's the human element. And what we tend to do in the beginning is we tend to overhype, and then we're always disappointed. And is this going to happen in the world of AI? Oh, absolutely. You know this meme, right? Sell me this pen. Today, this pen is powered by AI. There is so much hype out there. I mean, we're going to see things that are just lame. I was in an Apple store recently where I could buy a Colgate toothbrush powered by artificial intelligence. Lame, yeah? Absolute, complete nonsense. But don't make the mistake of underestimating the medium to long term. And today we're in, I call it the Hunger Games. I mean, it's a hunger for infrastructure and data. Look at infrastructure. We're building bigger and bigger models. We need more computational power. A company like AWS is investing $100 billion this year in capacity to make it work. That's $2 billion a week. It's a hunger for data. We can't find enough content. And look at the content players like the BBC, or look at the news companies that are going to have to make a choice. Do you either fight them or do you work with them? I mean, Wall Street Journal sued OpenAI, and Financial Times just said, we'll sell our content. It's a power issue. I mean, if you look at it, it's not just about training, but it's about the inference as well. And we're talking about a serious investment. I mean, data and computing power is now equal to energy. But it's also a real talent issue. And it's even there, geopolitical. If you look at China and their STEM engineering output, India half at that, US less than 600,000, it becomes a geopolitical power-hungry game. Now, I want to give you something extra that I'm very passionate about, is that I think at this moment the term AI is being used in a completely loose manner. And I think we have to see it as a spectrum. And the two extremes of the spectrum are the world of content and the world of data. I mean, when you look at the world of data, I don't think most of you run IT departments. Most of you run data departments. And this is the legacy that we have. In the last 20 years, we have overinvested in structured content, structured data. And that is something where the amount of information has just exploded. We tried to put it in all sorts of systems. We created silos, and what we now have is a complete information disaster. The problem is not an information overload, it's a filter problem. Information in your company should be as easily accessible as just opening up a tap, but what we've done is we've bottled it up in all sorts of instances and silos. That's the world of data. But then there's the world of content. And this is even more fascinating. And what I love to do when I visit a company like yours is basically see how you're using tools to manage not just your data, but your content. And for most of you, finding anything in your content is finding a needle in a haystack. This is the most underutilized feature of modern day computing. And it's a phenomenon that I call the JAWS phenomenon. And you're familiar with JAWS. I mean, it's really about,
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
every time you had a file server that was full, what was your reaction? We're gonna buy a bigger boat. And this has been an absolute fascination for me. I love to go to your company and see how you're using your shared file servers to store content. And I've started a collection. I'm a bit of a collector. And over the last 25 years, I've seen thousands of companies. And all I ask is half an hour on your shared drives. And I won't look at the documents. I will only look at how creative you've been with your folder names. And I can read your soul. It's a strange collection. I once went to a company where I found a folder. It was a SharePoint, corporate SharePoint, that was called Please Don't Delete, Please, Please. What does that say about an organization? In a company where knowledge management is vital, I found this beauty. We found this stuff on Fred's hard drive when he left. In a huge multinational, I found this one, crap from headquarters that we have to keep. And my favorite is this one, delete this folder when the auditors come in. The company doesn't exist anymore. It's a little bit of a joke, but the problem is, if you look at those two extremes, there's the world of data that we know so well, and there's the world of content that we really didn't pay much attention to. And content is about storing stuff, and data is about crunching numbers. But there's a gray area in between. And I take PowerPoint as an example. PowerPoint is the worst document format ever invented in the history of computing. It's terrible because it contains sometimes vital information, but it's sometimes even the place where you put something on a slide can have meaning. But we have these two extremes, and I think what we're going to have to do to really become information technology actors is marry those two, the world of content and data. And that is unlocking the true information potential. If you want to build knowledge, if you want to build intelligence in organizations and then find ways to deal with that, only if you have that right architecture, then you can unlock the power of reasoning in AI, or you can unlock the power of agentic in AI. And I think that is the biggest challenge of companies today. You have a limited view on that architecture. This is a quote from John Naisbitt that I love. We're drowning in information, but starved for knowledge. It's 40 years old. And I think it was very relevant 40 years ago. It's even more relevant in every single one of your companies today. And I believe the power of unlocking AI is not in using the tools, it's in grafting. Grafting is that unique biological property where you can take two things together and produce something that is beautiful. Now, let me explain. Most of you are very familiar and are doing amazing stuff in the world of data science. And that's where math, statistics, computer science, and domain knowledge comes together. And every one of you is now thinking, is my data AI ready? But if you look at the world of content, this is where we have to tap into computational linguistics and then apply algorithms and models and then apply it to domain. And I don't like the term prompt engineering. I think that is too limited. I think there's a new term. I started calling it content science. And what it means is that the world of structured data that we have spent the last 20 years building architecture for, now it's time to bring in that world of unstructured content. And that is complex. In most of your companies, there is probably 70% of the information that is unstructured. Only 30% is really the structured things that we have in our databases and data lakes. And I think we're really good at managing the data science in that bottom part. How are you going to unlock that top part? To put it in an architecture, in most of your companies, it's taken us 15 to 20 years in the world of structure to go from analyzing, why did it happen, to predicting. In the world of unstructured, all we can do is search. Now we can generate. We've built databases and data warehouses and data lakes. How are you going to unlock the power of unstructured? Left is classic data science, right is content science. There's a very strange animal called the fiddler crab. And I mean, I'm not a biologist, but I always wonder why. Why did nature create this? It's a very strange crab. It has one really big claw and then one tiny claw. And if you see these animals, they're just weird. They're just weird. Yeah? But it's also the perfect analogy for what you have in your companies. You often have a really strong structured data claw, but if you're not going to tap into the potential of that content piece, you're going to be missing out. Today, most of you have data engineers and data scientists and data analysts. Maybe we're going to need content engineers and content scientists and content analysts to unlock that. We're going to have to build the whole cycle of managing that, and that is broader than just that tiny little niche of data. I get excited about that because it's a completely new set of architectures and operations. Now, the final element here is what it means for humans. And the biggest challenge you all have in your companies is the famous productivity paradox. We're all using digital tools, but are you really that much more productive? No. Most of you, when you write a memo or even an email, you're starting from scratch. I mean, there's not much difference from when you were using the mechanical typewriter. The only difference is you don't have whiteout anymore. But how can you unlock that productivity? At the same time, people are getting scared. People are saying, oh, am I going to lose my job because of AI? I can only reassure you that is not going to happen. Humans are still the best low-cost, all-purpose, non-linear computer systems that can be mass-produced by unskilled labor. At least for now. But I think our role is going to change. And if I could give you one tip, it's not just about implementing AI, it's about ruthlessly removing the old ways of working. I started labeling that yesterwork, and your companies are filled with yesterwork. Yesterwork is the silent killer of an organization. And it's so nice to just add something new, just do something innovative, do something AI. But when are you going to stop doing the things that don't make sense anymore? And I go back to Drucker, who said, if you want something new, you have to stop doing something old. We have to become yesterwork hunters. I wrote a book on this called The Phoenix and the Unicorn. It's about, not just applauding the unicorns, but how can traditional companies that have been around for 100 years or even longer, reinvent themselves. And I love this image because it's clearly more work. But one thing I found is these companies that can reinvent themselves, they focus on what I call the day after tomorrow. It's a very simple model. How much time do you as leaders spend on today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow? And what is today? It's the hundreds of emails that you get every day. It's not just the emails, it's the Teams, the Zooms, the WhatsApps, the Slack channels. I don't know which one of you goes to work on Monday morning, and while you're driving to work, you naively think, today is going to be a productive day. It eats up so much energy. Now, the biggest problem is not today, but tomorrow. Most of you are stuck in mechanisms that were relevant in the old normal, but are no more relevant today when you look at the future. And I'll give you one example, budgets. I love budgets. Budget season, favorite time of the year. It's where people put fake news in Excel, and that is consolidated into something that never works. It's a yearly sarcastic corporate ritual that we do. How many of you put insane amount of energy in November into a budget that you could flush down the toilet by February? And then there's the day after tomorrow. These are the new ideas, new innovations, the things that can really, really move the needle. When I ask people, how much time do you spend? People say, 70, 20, 10. Reality, 93, 7, and 0. And the problem is value. Today is important, tomorrow even more so, but that day after tomorrow is vital to unlock the never normal. Now, it's a nice model, but it's not correct because most of you have, in addition to that, a big, ugly red square with negative energy, which we've labeled the shit of yesterday. And that is the complexity of most of your organizations. And if you say, he's right, we should clean up the soy first, you'll never get there. The day after tomorrow is crucial, and this is something I borrowed from AWS. How can you be bold on the vision and flexible on the details? It's the only way to navigate this complexity. When you look at AI, people say, no playbook, and it's true. But 5 things I've seen. Build a sense of urgency without scaring people. Develop the right capacities and skills. Build that foundation have that mechanism of governance in place and communicate. Without the sense of urgency, it's just blah, blah, blah. Without that skills, you're going to hit a wall. And I think it's more than just data science. Without the foundation, you won't be able to scale. Without that governance, you will not be able to build that trust. And then without the comms, all you're going to do is frustrate people. You need to fire on all cylinders to actually have results. So I think this is maybe my conclusion. If you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less. I think most of you are puzzle solvers. We're going to have to become mystery solvers. But I'm a big von Neumann fan who, in a brilliant article in 1955, said, "For progress, there is no cure." But I also believe we have to tell a positive story. What you have on the left is 1903, Wright brothers, who were bicycle repairmen, took the spare parts from their bicycle shop, went to the beach and built something that allowed us to fly for the first time. What you see on the right is the year that I was born in 1969 when Apollo 11 put Neil Armstrong on the moon. Between 1903 and 1969 is only 66 years. Imagine what you're still going to see. Let me end by, he was a bit of a drama queen, but he was always good for a quote, If you don't take change by the hand, it will take you by the throat. It's almost a leitmotif of the never normal. But we have a limited amount of time. I don't know if you know this meme, but it's my favorite meme. This is the man who worked at the same company his entire career. And every year they need to make a picture for his badge. And after 4 years, he's realized, oh my God, I've worn the same outfit for 4 years. You know what? I'm going to keep doing that until I retire. You see an entire man's career unfold in a few seconds. The waves just get bigger. We're going to have to find ways to really leverage. But I'll end with Maya Angelou. If you're always trying to be normal, you will never know how truly amazing you can be. I wish you the very best in the never normal. Thank you very much.